Good morning, everybody. All right, open up to Habakkuk. How many read Habakkuk in preparation for today? Did anybody read Habakkuk? Surely you did. Kathleen, you read through it all. You told me you read through the first chapter. Did you end up reading it all? The first chapter, at least. So that's good. That's a good start. I would encourage you over this next week to read Habakkuk. It is 3 chapters long, short chapters. The third chapter is a beautiful psalm by Habakkuk, widely regarded as one of the best psalms of all of literature, especially in the Old Testament. Just a wonderful, wonderful psalm. 3 short chapters of Habakkuk. This isn't going to take us a super long time, but as you know, I do like to oscillate between Old and New Testament. And we just got done with 1 Peter in the New Testament, so we're going to start something in the Old Testament, Habakkuk. You ever read Habakkuk before, even in the past? Like, do you know anything about Habakkuk? What I would like you to do is, write a 2-page paper about the first chapter of Habakkuk. What does it mean? What's it talking about? Tell me a little bit about who Habakkuk is and that sort of stuff. And just be ready for nobody's gonna do that, is they? That ain't gonna happen, is it? Homework's not gonna happen.
Habakkuk was written as a dialogue,
a
conversation between God
Perfect.
and the prophet.
There you go.
Habakkuk saw that the leaders in Judah were opposing
That's right.
the course.
That's
and
right.
He asked questions to write God aloud.
Sure, I can't believe you wrote that. That is so good. That's great. I'm glad somebody wrote something. That's really good. Well, Habakkuk. Some people think that Habakkuk is confusing. Some people think that most of the prophets, in fact, are confusing. A lot of the prophets are overlooked, I think. I don't know if I can prove that or not, but it just seems to me like nobody really talks about the prophets, especially the minor prophets. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to talk about it. We're going to think about the minor prophets, Habakkuk specifically. And I hope you're ready for this. A man found a cocoon of the emperor moth and took it home to watch it emerge. One day a small opening appeared, and for several hours the moth struggled, but couldn't seem to force its body past a certain point. Deciding something was wrong, the man took scissors and snipped the remaining bit of the cocoon. The moth emerged easily, its body large and swollen, the small wings were shriveled. He expected that in a few hours the wings would spread out into their natural beauty, but they did not. Instead, it developed into a creature free to fly. The moth spent its time dragging around a swollen body and shriveled wings. The constricting cocoon and the struggle necessary to pass through the tiny opening are God's way of forcing fluid from the body into the wings. The merciful snip was in reality cruel. Sometimes the struggle is exactly what we need. So as we go through Habakkuk, I want you to think about a time in your life when you went through something awful, something really bad, something you may not wish upon anybody else, but how in the end, it was the best thing that ever happened to you. You have a time like that? I suspect most of us have a time like that. Next week, as we get into chapter 1, I'm going to share with you my story. So what do you think of that? Oh, nobody's going to show up now. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Nobody's going to show up now. Now, next week, I'm going to share with you my story. So I want you to think about your story. What is something that's happened to you that may have been really bad to go through, something you weren't looking forward to, but in the end, it was the best thing that ever happened to you? My dad would tell a story like that. I'm glad he's not here. He'd probably be like, oh no. So I'm going to tell a story about my dad. So he worked for like 25 years in the automotive industry. And one day he got fired. Just came into work just like every other day for how many years? 2 decades. Walked into work one day. Kevin, we're going to need you to come in the office. Okay. Kevin, we're going to let you go today. Just like that. He went home. That was probably almost 20 years ago. And if you ask him about that, he would say, looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Boy, I tell you what, going through that though, you got a family, you got a mortgage, you got stuff going on, and you just lost your job just like that? Are you kidding me? This sucks. I'm sorry. That is not ideal. But looking back, best thing that ever happened to him. You have a story like that? Next week I'm going to tell you my story. But that's what we need to think about. Sometimes God uses the events of life, even though it's a struggle, to form you, to mold you, to shape you, to guide you, to direct you into something better, something bigger, something more glorious, something you'd have never thought possible. God can do that. So as you're going through hardships and struggles and difficulties in life, I want us to think about Habakkuk, and that's why we're going to go through Habakkuk. I think Habakkuk is an excellent complement to 1 Peter. We just got done doing 1 Peter. It was like 8 or 9 weeks of 1 Peter. All about dealing with the persecution, dealing with distress, troubles, tribulation, and how do you do that? You know, the skill that we need to do that. And then as we read Habakkuk, we're going to see a prophet of God actually live through something like that. What does this prophet, this man of God, do as he deals with struggles and suffering and temptation and trial and whatever he's going through? Because hopefully it'll help us as we go through many of those same things. So as people, we can face uncertain times in one of two ways. Either we can believe that God has forsaken us, or even conclude that there is no God. I always think of a time I had a friend who was deaf, and I asked him, of course I'm talking about God to him. Hello, of course I talk to God about everybody, And you know what he told me? That he didn't believe in God because God made him deaf. Does that make sense to anybody? Because I'm still, years later, trying to figure that one out. Sometimes people are like that, though. They don't want to believe in God because God did something to them. And in this case, he was deaf. Or we can face uncertain times, or we can believe that God does love us and does have a plan for us that does include hardship. So what are you going to believe as you go through tough times? So now we're going to turn our attention to this man Habakkuk. This man who looked at impending destruction and doom in his life, and we're going to see how he personally handles this situation. So today we're going to begin our study in the book of Habakkuk. God wants you to understand the book of Habakkuk. This is a very familiar outline to us, hopefully by now. This summer will be 6 years since I've been here.
Wow.
I know, right? Who'd have 6 years. So we've done this a couple times. Introductory message, same thing. I've been doing this for a long, long time. How can we understand the book of Habakkuk? 3 areas to understand, and maybe you already know what they are. We're going to understand the place of the book, the purpose of the book, and my favorite, the theology of the book. So let's begin to think about this. The place of the book. We're going to be looking at the place in 3 different ways. First, the author. The author, a man named Habakkuk. Does anybody, if we ever have another kid, baby, how about Habakkuk? No? It's good we're not having any more anyway then. I guess that's it. We're just not going to have any more. Can't name him Habakkuk, so I guess we're done. So little is known about the man Habakkuk. His parents aren't listed or mentioned. We only know that he lived in Judah somewhere, probably, possibly in Jerusalem. We don't know how old he was here, or if he was married, or if he has any children. We don't know when he died. Boy, this guy is a mystery. We do know that his name means embraced. But that provides just as much mystery, though. Is he the one doing the embracing? Or is he the one providing the embrace? It's hard to say. Scholars have debated that point for many, many years. Our Western minds, we like it to be one way or the other. You ever think about that as people? We like it to be one way or the other. We don't like things that are both. Hayden, on the other hand, he loves being both. We'll ask him, what's your favorite of this? And he'll think about it and he'll go, both. Like, he's got an Eastern mindset. Us in the West, we like one way or the other. He's either doing embracing or he is getting embracing, but it can't be both, certainly. Well, what if it is both? What if God is embracing him and then he's in turn embracing people? Why can that not be a possibility? He is worthy of needing comfort just like any of us. And like any of us, he can provide comfort to them. Sometimes in our lives, sometimes you need to be comforted. And you need somebody to come alongside of you and give you a hug, put their arm around you, have a nice kind word, be encouraged or uplifted. And sometimes we need to be doing that to other people. You never know what side of the coin you're going to be on. Do you need to be encouraged or do you need to be encouraging? And I hope that as we read and study this book, we'll be able to see it as both ways. The audience. Habakkuk lived in the region of Judah and was writing almost as if it was in his diary. So as you're reading this, you're going to see this dialogue between him and God, especially in the first chapter and most of the second chapter. It's almost like he's writing in a diary. He wasn't writing necessarily to anybody specifically in that sense, because it's like in a diary. This wasn't necessarily a message for the whole of the people. The beginning of chapter 1 doesn't begin with any type of statement of direct address. Oftentimes when you're reading something, it'll say to the church of Corinth, or to Timothy, my beloved son, and we know exactly, I bet this is for Timothy. Habakkuk doesn't start that way. He doesn't begin like that at all. In fact, the first verse says, the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. And he's just going to write down what he saw. He doesn't say this to anybody specifically. It's just kind of like he's writing in a diary. In fact, verse 2 directs the first section to God as the audience. If you really wanted to pin it down, you would almost have to say God as the audience. In that sense, he says, O Lord, how long shall I cry? He's like talking to God, but this is his vision. I think of him as writing it in a diary. And as the chapter progresses and even goes into chapter 2, the book begins to be more of a conversation between God and Habakkuk, and chapter 3 as a psalm of praise written by Habakkuk. So the age of this book, we've seen the author, the audience. What about the age? This is one of my most favorite parts as we think about the age. While it may be difficult to precisely pinpoint exactly when Habakkuk was written, we do have some clues and ideas about the general time in which it was written. The mention of the Chaldeans, you'll see the word Chaldeans in here. Who are the Chaldeans? Anybody know? Maybe it's in a study note or something like that. It's the Babylonians. And I hope everybody went, "Ooh, Babylonians." Why would you say, "Ooh, Babylonians"? Because we've studied the Babylonians before when we read Daniel. After going through Daniel, if you've done the Daniel study with us, or if you haven't, if you're watching this at home and you haven't listened to the Daniel thing yet, watch and listen to Daniel, and you'll learn all about the Babylonians, the captivity, and the issues that were facing the Jews at that time. Habakkuk is writing around that time. A mention of the Chaldeans suggests that the book was written probably sometime in the 600s BC. But can we do better than that? Based on 1:5, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 5, some scholars believe that Habakkuk was written sometime between 606 and 604 BC. Before 605, the Babylonians were merely rising in power and strength on the world stage. It isn't until the Battle of Carchemish at 605 that Babylon really rises in strength. And then once Babylon overtakes Egypt at that Battle of Carchemish in 605, they assert themselves as the most dominant nation on the planet. As God describes the rise of Babylon and what Habakkuk would understand about the rise, it would seem most likely that Habakkuk would have seen this as at 605 would have been concerned enough about it to understand what God is telling him in chapter 1. That's why I don't like my pages backwards like that. We've got to fix that, don't we? But anyway, so around 605, that Battle of Carchemish, Babylon is rising in power. It describes how Babylon has been rising in power, and we've studied that in the past. And that's about the time that Babylon starts to go into Jerusalem. They start taking captives. Daniel the prophet is taken captive around that time. And then in 586 BC is finally when Jeremiah witnesses the Babylonians finally utterly destroy Jerusalem. In fact, the book of Lamentations, written also by Jeremiah, it's written as like a funeral dirge as he describes the destruction of Jerusalem finally in 586 BC by the hands of the Babylonians. Habakkuk, on the other hand, is writing before all that stuff happens. So that's when it was written. It's what he's looking at. He's seeing this impending doom of the Babylonians as they're rising in power and starting to come towards him in Judah. The key themes. As we begin the purpose of the book, let's think about the key themes. One author puts it this way. This is a lengthy quote, but I thought it was really helpful. I liked how he worded this. In the days of Jehoiakim's reign, who was one of the kings of Judah around this time, just before the Babylonian captivity, the prophet Habakkuk penned an unusual message of hope and encouragement for God's people. Though doubts and confusion reign when sin runs rampant, an encounter with God can turn those doubts into devotion and all confusion into confidence. Habakkuk's book begins with an interrogation of God, but ends with an intercession to God. Worry is transformed into worship. Fear turns to faith. Terror to trust. Hang-ups are resolved with hope. Anguish melts into adoration. And when you're finished reading Habakkuk, you realize that the just shall live by faith. And that is our key verse for the book. Habakkuk chapter 2 in verse 4 goes something like this. Behold the proud. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. If you knew that impending doom was coming upon you for some reason, remember, you can face those challenges in one of two ways. You can either neglect God, say that he doesn't exist, and you don't like him anymore, you don't believe in God anymore, or you can embrace him as somebody that loves you and is willing to work with you, even though there will be hardships. And Habakkuk chose the second option. And he says that even though this hardship is coming, and even though pain is on the way, even though those things are going to happen to him, he is still going to trust God, because the just live by faith. He's going to have faith that even though what God is going to do may hurt and be painful for a while, God knows what's best, and he's going to walk him through it, and everything is ultimately going to be okay, because the just live by faith. An outline of the book. An outline. So I've got a couple of different outlines for you. One person has it this way. You have chapter 1's dialogue, you've got the dirge of chapter 2, and the doxology of chapter 3. Quick and painless, just like we like it, right? I've got it a little differently. I've got 4 different points in mine, and I think this is how we're going to walk through it as sermons here. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. The first question and the first answer, from avenge to awe. Number 2, chapter 1, verses 12 through chapter 2 and verse 5. Second question and second answer, from wonder to wisdom. Number 3, chapter 2, verses 6 through verse 20. The 5 woes of the Babylonians, from great to gone. And then chapter 3, verses 1 through verse 19, a doxology of praise, from worry to worship. This is how we're going to go through this over the next 4 weeks. Almost like a blip on the radar, but I think Habakkuk is going to be so awesome to go through as we think about Habakkuk and who he is and what he went through, as we think about this in our lives. I've heard before, as I've studied the prophets in other classes and stuff like that, oftentimes when you're reading the prophets and you're seeing what's going on and you're really getting a sense for what's happening with the prophets, you get the sense that when you read this, it's as fresh as reading the morning newspaper. Everything that Habakkuk is going through and went through and all the stuff that he dealt with, no different for us today. None. It's just a matter of what was it. It was just a different time. It may be different things, but he still went through hard times just like we go through hard times. So finally, the theology of the book. The theology of the book. This is probably my favorite part. I love theology. It was one of my favorite classes in college. I just really enjoy theology, and I hope you enjoy theology as well. So we're going to get a glimpse into the person and character of God through the eyes of the prophet. This book is really heavily focused on theology proper. And how does God relate to the prophet? How does God relate to Israel? How does God relate to covenant? How does God relate to promises? Which is why I thought Standing on the Promises was such a wonderful first song today, Shirley. Did you do that on purpose? No? You did. Sure you did.
God gave it to me in the night.
He knew what he was doing. It's almost, you ever wonder sometimes if God really knows what he's doing? And you're like, well, he must really know what he's doing to give Shirley a song like that. Because as we think about God, who he is, what he's done, the promises that he's given to us, think about the promises that he's given to Israel. Because remember, my good Bible scholars, this is in the Old Testament. Now, I've been trying to teach Hayden something for the last couple of days now. Hayden, are you ready? Who was the Old Testament written to? Say Jews. Say the Jews. The Jews, very good. Whew, that was a tough one, yeah. The Jews, the Old Testament was written to the Jews. The Old Testament was not written to us. It was written to the Jews, the Jewish nation, Israel, those people. So as we think about that, what are the promises given to the nation of Israel? That they're never going to go away. I will bless those who bless you. God says you need to keep covenant. The Mosaic law was a conditional covenant. You guys need to keep this for me to do the following. Those sorts of things. And we have to keep that in mind as we read Habakkuk, because Habakkuk is going to be wondering some stuff in chapter 1 relating to issues like that. And so if you can understand those issues, the promises, the covenants, these sorts of things that God has been doing with the nation of Israel for a long time by this point, you're going to understand his complaint of chapter 1. And if you still don't get it by next Sunday, that's what the sermon will be about. But if you understand that, it makes Habakkuk a lot easier to understand. So, as we think about the theology of the book, let's think about this a little bit more specifically. So in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, the prophet is being very candid with God. Have you ever thought about the idea of being candid with God? And by the way, what does candid mean? It just means really frank, open, honest. You ever talk to somebody and you feel like you're walking on eggshells? You can't really say what you want to say. You kind of want to have a conversation about something, but you're just not sure how they're going to take it. Are they going to take it the wrong way? Are you just going to make a big fight out of this? So I'm just not going to say anything at all. You ever have somebody like that you're just around and you just wonder how they're going to take stuff? Well, I'm going to assure you that when you talk to God, he can take it. Guys, just tell him what's on your mind. Just lay it out for him. You're not going to offend him. You're not going to make him mad. You're not going to bully him. You're not going to do all kinds of things that we worry about with other people. God can take you at your worst. Yeah, you haven't seen me at my worst, though. No, you're right. I may not have, but God has. God knows exactly when you're at your worst. And he can take you then. He knows your thoughts, your feelings. He made you. He knows the number of hairs on your head, and that's a dwindling number, I know. But he knows the number of them. He knows who you are. He knows what makes you tick. He knows your buttons. He knows your likes, and he knows your dislikes. There's nothing you're going to say to him that's going to offend him or make him mad. Just go talk to him, will you? Just go talk to him. Tell him what you're feeling. Tell him if you think something's not right. Ask him tough questions. He can take it. We can be candid with God, and the prophet here is very candid with God. And I think it's amazing to see how he's able to have such a candid conversation with God. We also see the sovereignty of God as he raises up the Babylonians in chapter 2 and verse 6. Nations don't make themselves great. You ever think about that? Nations don't make themselves great. God allows it. As we think about the greatness of the United States, we pray for our country, we pray for our president, we pray for all this great stuff. We should be praying for our nation. But why is our nation great? Is it because I'm awesome and you're awesome? Is that why this nation is great? Come on, guys. Why is this nation awesome? Because God has blessed us. That's why this nation is great. He can raise up the nation of the United States like this. And just as easily as he can raise this nation, guess what else he can do, guys? He can take her right down. You ever say that to your kids? I can give this to you. I can take it away. Surely you never said that to Rob, did you, when he was a kid? Not once, I'm sure. God can raise up the United States, and God can take this all away if he wants to tomorrow. And don't kid yourself into thinking that he can't. As we read Habakkuk, God allowed the Babylonians to rise in power. He allowed them to be great and wonderful and majestic. They had the Hanging Gardens in the middle of nowhere. The Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, Nebuchadnezzar built. God allowed them to be great. In his sovereignty, he allowed that. We have to understand that God is the one that's in control of all of this stuff. We have to give him the proper credit. And then another really fun one that we can talk about in chapter 2 and verse 13. I'll read you this verse. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Boy, what kind of theology has been drawn out of that? Maybe we'll talk about that. Can God see evil? Can God talk to the devil? Can the devil go to heaven? And have you ever had these kind of thoughts and conversations? That's where some of this comes from. And it's interesting to think about that. As we think about the other doctrines, Christology, pneumatology, we were talking in Sunday school class about maybe doing a Bible doctrine study after our time in Revelation. I suggested maybe we do a Bible doctrine class, and so these are some of the things we talk about. Christology, pneumatology, angelology. None of these are in Habakkuk, by the way. There's no mention of Jesus in Habakkuk, so there's no Christology. But one that is in anthropology is a study of mankind. The wickedness of mankind can be clearly seen in the Babylonians. As we read these 5 woes of chapter 2, God is going to explain to us these 5 woes of the Babylonians and what the Babylonians were like in their heyday. And it demonstrates, it shows to us the wickedness of mankind and what we're capable of doing when left to our own devices. And the last major doctrine that I think is in Habakkuk here is soteriology, is a study of salvation. How does a person who trusts God act and respond to the events of life? How we respond and react to the events of life is very telling for a believer. Oftentimes, you see people, something will happen to them, and they just fly off the handle, and they just can't believe that this happened to them. And why would a loving God ever allow this to happen to me? They get down on themselves, and they just go on and on. Maybe you've known somebody that's like this, and they just cannot believe that a loving God would allow this. But how does somebody who trusts God, because the just live by faith, by the way, how does somebody who really trusts God and has placed their faith in him, how do they respond to the events of life as it happens to them? How do you respond to the events of life as it happens to you? Do you respond with faith? Do you respond with fear? How do you respond? It shows and demonstrates where you stand with the Lord. And Habakkuk is going to clearly demonstrate how him, as a man of God, is going to respond to some terrible events of life. And how he can have faith in the midst of fear. And how he can maintain his faith in God even though he sees the Babylonians in the distance. How does he do that? And as we go through chapter 3, from worry to worship, we're going to see how he does that. And what's it like for him to go from worry to worship? And I trust it's going to challenge us as we go through the events of life. How do we get to that point of going from worry to worship? Regardless of what goes on, because sometimes life hits and it hits really hard. So I hope we have a great time studying Habakkuk. I hope you're really excited. I hope you go home and read at least chapter 1 as you get ready for next week as we deal with the first question and the first answer in the book of Habakkuk. Let's pray.